Hello, everybody. I cannot even begin to tell you how sorry and embarrassed I am about this. I decided to try and do... Oh, and it's not even using the right camera. Oh, my word. There we go. Hi. Wow. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. So I had Jens Notroff with me a couple of seconds ago, and then we discovered that I couldn't get OBS to work, which was amazing. And I have used it before, so I don't quite know why not. Hello! Yes, we have a guest.
It's working.
My goodness, it's working. I believe we are also streaming on YouTube, finally. Oh, my dearie me. And I discovered that everything I said before I gave you the new link, Jens, didn't get through to YouTube because it wasn't actually streaming anyway.
All right.
So I've literally been talking to myself for the past 4 or 5 minutes. And Josh has just told me that the stream is actually working. So hello, everybody. I'm so sorry that we're late. I'm especially sorry to Jens because he is in Berlin, and it is several hours later in Berlin than it is on the Western Shore of Maryland. But we're here, we made it, and we are going to have a conversation about Göbekli Tepe. And as I have been saying ad nauseum to really anyone who will listen, not built by aliens. If you think it was built by aliens, you're probably on the wrong stream. I invite you to check out anything by the History Channel for more alien-related information. If you want actual facts, archaeology, and history, then you're definitely in the right place. I am Megan Lewis. I am one half of Digital Hammurabi. I'm an Assyriologist. I have some minor archaeology experience, mainly picking up bits of pottery in southern Turkey. And my guest today is Jens Notroff, who is one of the archaeologists working on the Neolithic site of Göbekli Tepe. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to let Jens introduce himself, and then we will get started. Oh, before that, if you have any questions, please put them in the live chat. Josh is going to collate them and then bring them over to me when we've got maybe 15 minutes left to go so that we can get through as many questions as possible. But like I said, it is quite late in Germany, so this will not be a terribly long stream. We're looking at an hour, probably tops. So over to Jens.
Yeah, first, thanks a lot for having me. Really happy and thankful for the invitation. My name is Jens Notroff. I'm a prehistoric archaeologist, actually, specialized in the Neolithic and Bronze Age period. And I'm currently working in the German Archaeological Institute in the Orient Department. And since 2007, I think, yeah, in the Göbekli Tepe project, the excavations of the early Neolithic place of ritual or a meeting place, a social hub, as we like to call it now, in southeastern Turkey. Yeah, so that's basically the rough dates of my short bio.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. For those who don't know a lot about Göbekli Tepe, would you mind giving a very brief overview of the site?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. I can, but it's probably not going to be terribly coherent coming from me.
Yeah, I mean, I could start talking about this on and on, so I really have to cut it short. So the basic data would be that it is one of the oldest yet known monumental sites we are aware of. So it's one of the oldest known monumental architecture. So it's the site consists of several enclosure kind structures. It's circular buildings consisting of built of T-shaped pillars. So it is a characteristic building element. It's monolithic limestone pillars in the typical T shape. So with the, like the letter T. There's always a pair of these pillars in the center. They are up to 5.5 meters high, and they are surrounded by other pillars, building this kind of circle connected by walls and stone benches. And the amazing thing about this site actually is its age. So it was built roughly 12,000 years ago, so after the last ice age ended. And this means that it was built by hunter-gatherer groups. So it predates the invention of pottery, the invention of agriculture and cattle breeding, food production, as we call it. Mm-hmm. So these were still to a certain degree mobile groups of hunter-gatherers roaming the landscape, following the hunted game, and basing their whole subsistence on hunting and gathering, actually. And this makes it so exceptional that these people still invested so much time and effort into the construction of monuments, because this would imply several things we certainly would not have suspected in such an early period, like work specialization, for example. So people who are carving these pillars and are erecting these monuments have no time to go hunting at the same time. So they have to be, and also the number of people involved seems to outnumber the hands we have in a usual hunter band of 25 to 50 people. So this speaks for an amount of cooperation and coordination, which is quite interesting and significant for such early, apparently egalitarian groups. So there's much more going on in social hierarchy terms than we suspected earlier. So, and a very, very short summary.
No, that's really interesting. Thank you. And that's particularly interesting for me because in Mesopotamia, one of the things we're often taught is that craft specialization is something that you have to have kind of like settled civilization for in order to produce that food surplus. So I'd never heard of like the idea that hunter-gatherer societies could have that kind of specialization. That's really fascinating.
Food surplus, actually, because even if we guess rather conservatively with, let's say, 500 people or maybe hundreds of people involved in the construction activity, this still means you need to feed up to 500 people on time on a certain occasion who are not able to invest time into hunting themselves. And this means that this food has to be provided by someone. And this is quite interesting. At the moment, we are working with a model we are adopting from ethnology, social anthropology, actually, which is, could be subsumed under the term work feasts. So you people are coming for a huge feast, and this is the attracting factor to have the manpower you need to build monuments. So this is known from historical and even rather recent monument building societies, but this means that these people have to be fed. And this is a quite interesting thing, considering that the subsistence these people based their whole life on was hunting and gathering.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating, thank you. So archaeologists have exposed several of these round building structures with the pillars. I was reading that there are probably quite a few more still buried. Is that right?
Yeah, we've did some geoelectric survey a couple of years ago, several times, and the results are indeed implying that there may be up to 20, maybe even more of these structures. 9 are excavated as of yet.
Wow! And can you see any like developments over like chronologically speaking? Do they get bigger or smaller, or is it too difficult really to pinpoint which one came first?
Yeah, it's really difficult to get an internal, a relative chronology into these building structures for a very particular reason. It seems that these structures were not built and then they're finished, but they're constantly rebuilt, repaired, rearranged. So what we see is, of course, only the last state of the long biographies of these buildings. And there is evidence visible in these sites that pillars were removed and used for other enclosures, for example, that broken pillars were re-erected there, and some pieces the broken off head was replaced, and so on. So I think it would be quite possible to say that almost none of these pillars stands in its very original first position. So it's really hard to say which of these buildings is the oldest, or if they are contemporary, maybe built by different groups competing where. So we know roughly that they date to the 10th millennium BC by radiocarbon dates we took from the vault, organic material in it. And of course, we have the filling material of these enclosures, but then again, the backfill does, of course, not date the use time of the enclosures, but only the material which was put into the enclosures when they were buried and abandoned, that we cannot clearly say where this material is coming from. So it may have been deposited for years or millennia at another site. So so it's really difficult to say something about the internal chronology of these different buildings. Yeah,
that's fantastic. And do you think they would have been roofed originally? I know that roofing can be a really difficult thing to work out archaeologically, especially if you're roofing with wood, because it doesn't stay.
So you're directly going in medias res, because this is one of the discussions we're actually doing since the very beginning of research. Were these enclosures roofed or not? Meanwhile, we had a couple of building historians looking into the structures, and almost all of them were coming up with convincing arguments that these structures indeed might have had roofs, however these might have looked. So we didn't find any traces of these roofs inside the enclosures, which makes sense if they were abandoned and completely clean, so you remove everything you don't need. But having seen the enclosures both under the open sky and now under the artificial shelter we built ourselves to protect the limestone, I can say that the atmosphere in these buildings definitely is a different one in a roof building. So with all these animal reliefs and these huge monuments, larger than life monuments, if they are under a roof and the light is a bit more dim, and so they definitely appear more impressive under a roof. And personally, I could actually see that they had roofs, because this would somehow make the buildings more special, make them more exclusive, so you can't see from the outside what's going on in there. So it would make sense to some degree to have roofed structures here. Yeah.
How interesting. And so you said that a conservative estimate would be around 500 people to try and build one of these things. How long are we looking at to? I know you said that they were constantly being worked on, but are there any ideas on roughly how long it would take to put one together?
It's really difficult to say, because on one hand, we are talking about trained hunters here. So I know that there was experiments with students, calculations how many times a single pillar would need to be carved and so on. But talking about trained and strong hunters or maths here. And then on the other hand, there's again the argument that a lot of pillars were reused. So I think it could be a really quick event of maybe weeks.
Oh, okay.
But on the other hand, maybe it was not important to complete an enclosure during one of these events. Maybe it was about bringing in 2 new pillars, or bringing in a new pillar to a certain special occasion. Actually, we don't have an idea about the frequency of the rituals or the building activity taking place up there. If it was every year, if it was every 5 years, every 10 years, and they had to clean up the whole place and start repairing it. It took some time for sure, but I would rather think about weeks than months, to be honest.
I see. Fantastic.
But that's a personal guess.
Yeah. I was reading that the original excavator was hoping to find, like, he was thinking of it as kind of like a funerary installation, and hoping to find some kind of burial site or graveyard, maybe under the floors. Is there anything to back that up, or is that kind of an old idea now?
It still is. I mean, the idea is still under discussion, because we didn't excavate everything on the place, but we didn't find real burials as of yet. The idea comes from the mortuary ritual of the period and region. So the pre-pottery Neolithic, that is the period we're talking about, is known for let's call it a concern about the disarticulated body. We all know, for example, the famous Jericho skulls with the remodeled faces, where the faces were given back. The skulls were given back a face with a plaster of gypsum and with shells for the eyes and so on. And actually, there are similar phenomena visible in southeastern Turkey and Anatolia as well, that skulls were removed from burials. And interesting, some of these burials really were situated under the floor of the living rooms of these people. And so, but to remove a skull and to replaster it, it has to be excarnated. So the flesh has to be gone. And this is quite interesting because what we see in the iconography, not only of Göbekli Tepe, but also of related sites of the period and the region, is really this concern about disarticulation. So there are a lot of vulture depictions in connection to headless human bodies or the scavenging birds with separated human heads. And this is quite interesting if we, on the one hand, consider this this concern about excarnation, disarticulation, and on the other hand, remember a burial ritual even practiced today in Asia and Asia, the so-called sky burial, where the dead bodies are placed in a remote spot in the landscape, usually high up in the mountains, in kind of towers, and then scavenging birds, mostly vultures, are coming to feed on these bodies, eating the flesh and leaving the bare bones. These are then collected and buried. And it's, of course, quite interesting to bring this together with the depictions of vultures we have in Göbekli Tepe, but also on other sites like Tshaped. So one idea is that Göbekli Tepe maybe has a function in this kind of mortuary ritual, that it was one of these remote places where scavenging animals were feeding on the bodies, which actually had to be prepared. So we know from this, I think it was from Tibet, from the examples, you could Google sky burial in Tibet, but be warned, better do this before breakfast. These bodies have to be prepared. So the vultures are not going there to eat the flesh. So they usually use a big knife or something to prepare the meat so that the vultures have easier access. And this is something which could be possible interpretation, or one of the possible functions of the site. And this, again, would explain why we don't have actual burials, because the burials were taking place elsewhere.
So the bodies would have been left to be removed by the vultures, and then the bones themselves would be taken back maybe to another burial.
What we do have, what we actually do have in the bone record of site, so the avifauna, the bird bones, is an unusual high amount of vulture and corvid bones, so scavenging animals, actually. More than 50%, if I remember correctly, while usually in settlements, it's about 10%. So it's not evidence, but there are several hints pointing in this direction.
That's fascinating. Wow. So, I had a question. Oh no, I remember. I mentioned to you before we went on air that I'd been subjecting myself to the Ancient Aliens episode on Göbekli Tepe, and one of the things that they said, which made me about come up out of my seat, was that the carvings on the monumental pillars invariably show animals that are not native to the region that they were found in, and they mentioned an armadillo. And looking at what they thought was an armadillo, I'm not sure even I would say that was an armadillo. But how secure can you be in identifying these animals and locating them in the geographical region?
So there are two things coming together here. First, our own view onto these pillars, and I mean, people are looking at things and they're seeing things if they want to see things. But we are working together with archaeologists who are not only looking into the bone material we unearthed, but who also, of course, had a very close look on the animal depictions. And what almost every one of these specialists were saying is that the depictions are incredibly naturalistic on one hand, but they are following a certain path from the very naturalistic image to a short symbol. So we have a lot of animals which feature all the characteristics you would expect if you look into a book to look up a certain animal. You can even go through a checklist. So the vultures, for example, they have the characteristic beak check, they have the characteristic collar check. So it's really possible to pinpoint the species. And that said, there is that I think we can identify almost all of these animals as a native and local animal. And the fact that they are so naturalistic depicted comes, of course, from the stonemasons doing these pictures. These are hunters. They were living among these animals 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So they really knew what they were depicting. And so it's all, the complete fauna is definitely local. So there's nothing in there which wouldn't fit. And there's no armadillo, actually. I'm not aware of armadillo.
I didn't think there would be a natural armadillo. So what are the theories for why these animals were being carved on the pillars?
It's quite interesting. In a hunter society, you would expect predominantly the hunted animals, the game depicted. And to some degree, it's true. We have a lot of boar. We have a lot of foxes. There are aurochs also quite prominent. So this is the animals these people would have hunted and eaten. Oh, I'm not too sure about eating the fox, but aurochs and boar definitely. But on the other hand, there are also a lot of animals which, at least to us today, have a more symbolic connotation. So there are giant scorpions, there are snakes, and a lot of these vultures as well. So there seems to be more going on than just depicting the menu table on these pillars. So yeah, I think these depictions serve as some kind of memory storage. So they are telling stories, mythological scenes, if you want to put it like this. Because on some pillars, we really seem to see what seems to be a narrative scene. So there's one example, one rather famous example now, of a vulture on the pillar presenting an orb on his wing, which might be an egg or might be a head or something, or the sun. It's hard to say. And on the same pillar, there's another vulture, and it's apparently a headless man is riding this very same vulture. So there's something going on which might have been very obvious to the Neolithic hunter. So a story, yeah, of course, this is a mythological scene. We all know it, but we today can't understand the scene.
Not so much.
Yeah, we're lacking the cultural background. I often like to compare this. If you imagine that a colleague in 5,000 or 10,000 years is excurged, and he's finding the symbol of the cross. He sees the symbol, but he has nothing about the whole story of the passion behind it. So, and this is something we are confronted here with as well. We see the symbols, but we have no idea about the subliminal meaning behind these symbols. So, but it's definitely more than just decoration, for sure.
Fascinating. And I think, again, this came up before we went on air. One of the very frustrating things that I find with ancient alien theorists is that they are very willing to take these depictions, fantastic depictions, and really build up whatever story they feel is most interesting, and then present it as fact, whereas people who actually are trained, either archaeologists or anthropologists, look at things and say, well, this is what it shows. We don't really know what it symbolizes. These are some possibilities, but realistically speaking, we just don't know, and we can never know, because this is a very ancient society that's completely removed from our own.
They have to sell a story, and they definitely are trying to sell a story. And this is why they're always pretty quick with presenting facts, while we are more hesitating. I mean, we are talking in conjunctives almost all the time. It could be like this. It's possible. But the reason is none of us was there. So we really don't know. And we only have the material remains of these people telling us what was happening there. We don't even have written records. And the material record we have is, maybe that's something we really should be aware of, and also the viewers of Ancient Aliens should be aware of, is a selection. So this is only a very, very small part of the actual real material record these people had. So if it's in burials, it's of course an intentional orchestration of something. So this selection was intended to tell something. If we find what's most of our day job rubbish, so this is stuff these people left behind. So it's only a small fraction of the real material record we know of, and this is the difficult thing about prehistoric archaeology lacking any written sources. We are trying to see the picture in the puzzle, but two-thirds of the puzzle pieces are missing, actually.
Mm-hmm. 2/3 of them are missing, and you don't know what the original picture was.
And you don't know what the original picture was, exactly. So it's like blue sky above blue sea or something, and you try to put it together.
Yeah. You're like, well, which one? Yeah. So what, I know that the two, am I correct in thinking that the two monumental pillars in the center of each construction, were they anthropomorphic figures, or did they have the animals on them?
It's a good point, because that's something I should have mentioned in the beginning. The T pillars, actually, this is something we recognized in the course of excavation, are meant to be anthropomorphic. So they are larger than life human or human-like sculptures. So the T shape is a very abstract, reduced shape of the human body. And I know this sounds very, very fancy in the beginning. I was not convinced as well when I first saw these T pillars. But in the course of excavation, we excavated more and more of these pillars, and suddenly arms became visible. So these T-shaped pillars have arms on the sides, they have hands, they have even pieces of clothing depicted, so belts and loincloths hanging from these belts, loincloths in the shape of fox skins, actually. So they are really recognizable as anthropomorphic. And it's interesting because they have no faces, they are faceless, and they are larger than life. And we also know life-sized sculptures, very naturalistic sculptures with faces from the same period, from settlements of the same period in the same region. So as one famous example from nearby Şanlıurfa, which is the next biggest city, the so-called Ofa man is or was considered the oldest life-size depiction of a human being. And this is a very naturalistic sculpture of a man, life-size, with a face. And it's interesting that at Göbekli Tepe, we don't have these life-size sculptures, but we have the heads. So the broken off heads are deposited in the filling of these backfilled enclosures. So that's why I believe that there's something, it's different levels we're seeing here. The T-shaped pillars, the larger-than-life monuments, are depicting a different level than the life-size naturalistic sculptures.
Interesting. So again, with the caveat, you can never actually know. Do you think that the T-shaped pillars are gods or ancestors, or like just social leaders?
It would be natural from our perspective today to call them gods or deities. Of course, as an archaeologist, I hesitate, because we have no idea if these people had an organized religion. This would be necessary to state gods. But ancestors, for example, could be something I could imagine. It's interesting because it's here coming up with the idea, it must be a man and a woman, so the mythical ancestor couple. But they both wear belts and loincloths, and we know from figurines from the nearby site of Neolithic, where T-shaped pillars actually were excavated for the first time, that figurines with belts usually depict men. So the couple in the center seems to be two male individuals, and this may hint at ancestors. So an ancestor cult would as well go hand in hand with the display of remodeled skulls we mentioned earlier. So that's something I could imagine, actually. Yeah.
Interesting. So I know that T-shaped pillars are relatively, maybe not common, but they occur at other sites around Göbekli Tepe. Are they significantly different to the ones that you see at Göbekli Tepe? Are they like smaller or less ornamented, or?
So yeah, I mentioned Neolithic. That is a site where T-shaped pillars were excavated for the first time, and this actually is what helped Klaus Schmidt, who discovered Göbekli Tepe and who was the excavator and project leader until his untimely death in 2014. This was why he started to work there, because he recognized this kind of architecture from the earlier side of Neolithic. And there are 5 or 6 or maybe even more in the meantime, more sites in the vicinity or surrounding Göbekli Tepe, which also have produced T-shaped pillars. The problem here is that none of these sites was excavated. So we only know what's visible on the surface. And what we see there are the rather smaller pillars we also have at Göbekli Tepe in a younger layer. So smaller, reduced architecture up to 2 meters high. So there are T-shaped pillars, and there are even 1 or 2 examples of large pillars, pictures of large pillars I've seen. But since they're not excavated, it's hard to say if the degree of monumentality is the same, and if these sites indeed just repeat what we know from Göbekli Tepe, or if they repeat what we know from Neolithic, where one special building had these T-shaped pillars. This is something which is interesting as well, because of all the settlement sites we know from the same period. We are aware of settlement architecture, of domestic architecture, something we did not yet see at Göbekli Tepe. What we see at Göbekli Tepe is another building type from these settlements, and this is what we used to call special purpose buildings, which are interpreted as communal buildings for gatherings, for rituals. They are large, they have these stone benches, and this is something which seems to be repeated at Göbekli Tepe. So while each settlement in the vicinity has one of these special purpose buildings, at Göbekli Tepe there is a large number of these special purpose buildings. And this again is what's making the site so special.
Fascinating. So I want to emphasize for people watching, one of the things that often is coming up in, like, again, and I keep going back to it because I think it's very important to deal with people talking about ancient aliens and appropriating these fascinating sites. One of the things that often comes up is how singular and how different Göbekli Tepe is for the time period and for the area it's in. And what I'm hearing is that it is different to what we currently know, in that it has these multiple enclosures and the monumental architecture, but it's only different because we haven't fully excavated all of the other sites that we know have smaller pillars, but still the same pillars. And this is one of the massive problems with archaeology, that you can't just go digging up absolutely everything that you see and that might be interesting. So if you come across a site that appears to be so singular, you really have no way of knowing that it is. It's singular for us because we haven't excavated everything else.
Yeah. And even in the meantime, it isn't singular anymore, because I mentioned the other T-shaped pillar sites, and also if we take a larger vicinity around Göbekli Tepe, the iconography on these pillars is also found on stone vessels, on small stone plaquettes, not only in Göbekli Tepe, but also in a large number of other sites in northern Syria, in Turkey. So there are many sites reflecting the same iconography, reflecting maybe the same ideas represented by this iconography, and even the architecture may be reflected by local variations, just not T-shaped pillars, but large monoliths, large stone slabs. So this is it is unique because it is such a special place, because it's the only place excavated in such a scale. But we now know a lot of other sites in the vicinity which belong to the same cultural phenomenon. So it's not a lighthouse in the middle of nowhere. So that's definitely not the case.
Excellent. Okay, so now is probably the time, everybody. If you've not given Josh your questions, please do so. Just post them in the live chat. He'll send them over to me, and then we'll deal with them in a minute. And also, if you haven't already, please like the video and subscribe. That really helps us out. And we'll give maybe 2 minutes to make sure we get all the questions in, and then we'll start answering those. But Jens, what kind of like public access is there to Göbekli Tepe? If I like got on a plane and flew over, would I be able to go and look at the site for myself?
Well, the site is since July, I think it's on the UNESCO World Heritage List, and it's so official, a recognized cultural heritage site. It's open to visitors, but it also was open, of course, before it was added to the list. So there's a visitor center with a little exhibition. There is infrastructure there now. There are toilets. There's a road up there. You have to pay an entrance fee, as far as I remember. So it is possible to visit the site during the usual day times. It's an open air museum by now. So from Şanlıurfa, which is the next biggest town, it's 20 minutes by taxi. I think there even now are buses going. There's an airport in Şanlıurfa, so you can fly directly from Istanbul to Şanlıurfa. And there also is, of course, the archaeological museum in Urfa itself, and it's said to be the largest in Turkey, if I'm not mistaken. And it's definitely worth a visit because a lot of the things we excavated are now on display in the museum, so sculptures and tools and so on. And they have one-to-one replica of one of the enclosures you can actually enter, so you can walk around, which is something you cannot do, of course, in the excavation.
That's fantastic. Excellent. So if you're ever in Turkey, go and visit.
The region is definitely worth a trip anyway. So Urfa has a lot to offer, even beyond. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, we have one comment that Josh just sent me. So Brant, who watches an awful lot of our stuff and is a very great support, said that everyone should become a Patreon, which I heartily agree with. If you become a Patreon of our channel, all of the money goes to a summer scholarship fund that we're setting up. The plan is to get roughly $2,500 that we can then give to a PhD student, either for a travel grant or some kind of research. And then after they go and do their research next summer, they can come back and tell everybody about what they did. So he said that everyone should become a Patreon. Again, heartily agree with that. And that if someone became one during the stream, he would personally up his Patreon donation. Oh, and someone did. So we now have a new Patreon, and then Brant very kindly gave us more money. So thank you. That's amazing. Okay, so Firefly Rises says, how do you date artifacts when the site has been deliberately filled in?
Sorry, it was a technical. I didn't get the question. Could you please repeat it?
Yes. How do you date artifacts when the site has been deliberately filled in?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are two ways to date the site. So one is the so-called archaeological dating, where you have specific tool types, because everything humans are doing follows fashion, and fashion change over time. And this is why in stone tool types, you can really, a protocol point, an arrowhead, for example, is very, very specific for a certain amount of time. And then they started to notch a bit more, or to turn around here and to add another little feature. So you can really date these tool types with the help of other sites, of course, where these types are also coming from. So this is the archaeological dating. We are looking into the objects, and we are comparing the objects we found here with other sites. And of course, then there is the other complex of dating, which is scientific dating with radiocarbon dates, for example. You can date bones. Does not work very well at Göbekli Tepe because the preservation is not so good. And other organic material. I mentioned that we could at least date the plaster on the wall, because these walls in these enclosures were plastered with mud. And there was pieces of charcoal were in there. And we could date these. They tell us at least that the last time this wall was plastered must be around the time, in this case it's 10th millennium BC. These little charcoal pieces tells us, but there is always a difficult in dating charcoal, because we have no idea how old the wood was lying around there, or if some old charcoal maybe was coming into the mix. So it's that's why none of these dating techniques stands alone, but there are a lot of different approaches backing up each other. So when the tool types are telling something about a date and the scientific date is supporting this, so when they are a big step forward towards a certain date. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. Beej Price asked, when the site was first found, I heard mention of tiny evidence of agriculture, a plant in one small area. Did that change, or is that still reasonable?
I think there's something mixed up here, because the site itself was used as for agriculture in recent times. So until excavation started, it was the field for locals living in the villages around. So there is the agriculture going on there. So it's modern agriculture.
Okay, but there's no evidence for
but not today, because
cultivation.
It's no, actually, all the plants we found there are wild forms. Same goes for the animals. No domesticated animals or plants as of yet. But it's all any biologist will tell you that's difficult, because to see domestication in the bone material and the plant material takes generations. So until it's really visible in the material. So so it's not visible at the finds we have at Göbekli Tepe. Yeah.
I see, thank you. Firefly rises again. Are any symbols in Göbekli Tepe seen elsewhere?
Yes, that's what I mentioned, that a lot of the iconography we have there, the snakes, vultures, and also the style these are depicted in, are known from a lot of other sites, contemporary sites, in a radius of about a diameter of about 200 kilometers. So into northern Syria and to Turkey, we know a lot of other sites with the same iconographic repertoire. Yeah.
Excellent. And Turnsol 80, two related questions actually. Are dogs represented at all?
Dogs definitely were already around at the time. We have some depictions, graffiti actually, later additions to pillars, which might be dogs, but we have a huge discussion with our zoologists going on right now if it's really dogs, because it's really hard to recognize a dog in a line graffiti. So maybe not.
Okay. And Yamiyo Miziku, are all of the animals depicted real, or they're fantastic creatures like dragons that you may see at other religious sites?
They are all real, and it has to be noted that artificial creatures or hybrids, as we know them from later historical periods, from Greek mythology and so on, absent in the Neolithic and preceding periods. There are very, very few depictions of creatures mixing different characteristic traits. So it's almost always a very naturalistic depiction of the environment of these hunters.
Okay, so this is all stuff that people, like you were saying, the hunters would go out and live next to and be able to see and then recreate themselves.
There are very few examples from the Paleolithic cave paintings in France and Spain where you could argue it is some kind of chimera hybrid creature, but not at Göbekli Tepe, not at all.
Okay. And Firefly rises again. What is a good book or website for more information, or should we wait for a decade or so?
Good question, actually. We've got a project weblog running where we are reporting on ongoing research, on publications. I could send you the link later.
That would be great. Thank you. I'll put it in the description.
The blog itself is named the Tepe Tellers. You should find it, but I sent the link anyway. And this would be, maybe I'm too much self-advertising, but this would be the source I would recommend you, because we've got the publication list and we really try to be up to date with recent research and so on.
Excellent. N613, is this area isolated, or are you working on finding ancient ruins of towns around the same area?
Well, Göbekli Tepe itself is situated in the mountains, so it's rather isolated, but there are villages around, modern villages, and there are also structures around which might be Byzantine or Roman. So the area itself actually is full of ruins, not directly at the Göbekli Tepe. This seems to be abandoned after the enclosures were backfilled, but in the vicinity there are a lot of ruins, also from Roman times. So it's not really isolated, no.
Okay, but nothing contemporary with Göbekli Tepe itself. or at least not that you found?
No, the site, it's really in the mountains. It's rather remote. There's a village there, but there's no water access actually up on the
I see. So Brandt says, how did they put rocks together at Göbekli Tepe to the point that paper can't even fit between them?
I'm not sure if I get the question right.
I think one of the arguments that the ancient alien theorists make, and I severely doubt this is rooted in fact, is that the rocks in the walls fit together so smoothly that you can't slot a piece of paper through.
They don't.
They don't. Excellent.
No,
good answer.
It's dry walls, basically. So no, we don't.
Okay. And this is my question. Is it there any kind of mud plaster used, or is it just the rocks held together by themselves?
There might be. We're still looking into this question. Actually, there's some hint at it's not only mud was used as some kind of binding material, but it's still something we're looking into. So.
Excellent. Nelsie asked about the roof. I'll say we asked about whether Göbekli Tepe was roofed. The answer is don't know. Maybe. There is an artificial roof on now to protect it, and you were saying that actually it completely transforms the feel of the site.
Yeah. And the building historians say technically it would be possible and it would make sense, and the pillars have roughly the same height. So. And one argument one of the colleagues was giving me is, if in that time you build something on the same level, you do this because you want to put something on top of this. So maybe.
I'll go with that. Brandt asks, did they walk with dinosaurs before and after the Great Flood? Brandt, probably.
No.
And I
so
actually
definitely no contemporary.
No dinosaurs were contemporary with Göbekli Tepe. No. That's good to know. I have a question. How difficult is it to carve the stone pillars? You said they're limestone. Were there harder stones that would have been used as etching materials to make the relief carvings?
Yeah, I've heard the argument that it would have been impossible to carve this stone.
They must have had lasers.
Modern tools. Actually, it's rather comparably soft limestone, and you could easily scratch it with the flint stone lying around. I know because I did. So it's really possible to work with the stone tools. So, yeah.
Excellent. Deborah McMillan, does any archaeology in Gbekli Tepe point to star systems?
I know it's a huge discussion, archaeoastronomy, going on. As of yet, I did not encounter any reliable proof of any relation to star movements. So the pillars are not oriented towards something. They may have been subterranean, which makes the whole orientation question rather obsolete in my eyes. I wouldn't exclude it, but I have not seen any reliable evidence as of yet.
And I suppose if it was roofed, really the location of the pillars in relation to stars is less of an important question.
Yeah.
Interesting. So Kenneth Nystrom says, is there any indication at all that the signs could be interpreted as coherent in a textual context?
A textual context?
Could it be like a glyph system at all?
Not writing as we understand it today, but as I said, a symbolical storage of important knowledge for sure. So whether the aurochs is more than just the picture of an aurochs, but telling the whole story behind it, yeah, that's something I would think so, yeah. But okay. A writing system in a sense of hieroglyphs, rather not, no.
Not so much. Okay, Brandt again. What was the main food source for those living at Göbekli Tepe? Well, I'll say briefly, there probably wasn't anyone living there. But when they came and had these possible feasting events to erect the pillars, where would the food have come from?
I mean, I mentioned these feasts as an attractive factor to bring people together there. And what we found in the filling of these enclosures in large numbers are animal bones. In particular, gazelle and aurochs. And aurochs, also quite interesting, only the meaty parts. They didn't carry up a whole aurochs up there, but only the stuff I wanted to eat. So the heads are completely missing, for example. And one aurochs could easily bring up 200 kilogram meat or so. So
Oh, wow.
really a lot of meat. And plant food also played an important role. There's right now a project running by a colleague looking into plant food. And so with this definitely, yeah, typical hunter-gatherer stuff. We have almonds, there, pistachios, and a lot of meat.
Fantastic.
And yeah, maybe even, but this is also preliminary and discussion on its own, hints at some kind of beverages, so early beer, but a very, very yeah, slow, very low form of beer.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Beach Price says this is a little off topic, but she really likes your artwork.
Oh, thank you.
I must say I agree with her. N613, has everything been dug out, or what percentage is still left covered up?
Yeah, I know where there's a number floating around the internet that only 5% are excavated, and I think this number is 15 or 20 years old. It's really hard to say how much you excavated of something if you don't know how big it actually is.
Yes.
So we didn't excavate all of it. We didn't probably even excavate half of it. But there's one important thing I really would like to stress here is that we don't want to excavate everything, because excavation means destruction. If you excavate something, as archaeologists, we are not only interested in the objects we're excavating, we are interested in the context. So the soil surrounding it, the layers of the soil, other finds next to these objects. And once this is excavated, it's gone, it's destroyed. And this is why we usually don't want to excavate everything of a site. We just want to excavate enough to understand what's going on, but we also want to leave and preserve as much as possible, because who knows, in 100 or 200 years, colleagues are coming with other technologies, other questions, and it would be good to leave something for them as well. So it's not our aim to excavate everything.
Wonderful. So we have 2 more questions, and I think then we're done. So Vlad Tepes says he really likes your articles on the Tepe Telegram site. And Ahmed says, is it true that there are reliefs at the site depicting a cataclysmic event that took place roughly 12,000 years ago?
I know the paper this is, sorry, yeah, I know the paper this is referring to. Some of the depictions were interpreted as star signs, zodiac signs, and as commemorating an event apparently taking place 1,000 years before the site was probably erected. And I'm not really convinced of seeing zodiac signs here, because assuming that we are now looking up to the sky and we're putting together the exact same stars to a Taurus or Aries, like these people did, is something I couldn't see actually. So no, I wouldn't. Actually, my answer would be to see any cataclysmic event depicted there.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, I think that is probably us done. Thank you, Jens, so much for joining us again.
My pleasure.
About the TV.
Thanks for inviting me, actually.
Oh, no, it's been wonderful. I've had a great time. If you have enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Someone asked if we're doing an after show. I don't know. Josh, are we doing an after show? Josh can decide. I'm hungry, so I should probably eat some food. Just throwing that out there. So Josh will decide if we're doing an after show. I don't know. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you very much. And Jens, thank you again. This was an absolute pleasure.
For me too.